In a mansion, two maids were discussing a huge pile of applications that had arrived at the mansion in which the Duke was looking for a bride, but the women were skeptical because they considered the man to be trash. But be that as it may, he was the one who caused a scandal at last night's party. And although it was just gossip, it was said that the Duke had forced a drunken baron to kneel when he questioned his lineage and ordered a servant to throw dirty mop water on him as his assistant passed by them. The maids immediately fell silent, but he pretended not to hear and went to the master's study. The assistant brought lists of women who had responded to his offer, and it seemed that many different families wanted to sell their daughters. But the man didn't understand if it was worth looking for a bride through an interview because the nobles would not remain silent with such a pretext, and if it was necessary to send any invitations, but the Duke himself did not consider refusing and ordered him to get to work because in the end even this mad emperor had to be satisfied. The heroine couldn't understand what she was doing here, why she was in this bad carriage and why she was going to the engagement with that bad Duke. Since nothing had gone right for her since she had moved to this world, she was ready to start a new career. After years of unemployment, but it didn't happen because the plane met a sad fate, and when she opened her eyes she saw Aurora, a character who looked like her but with pink hair. It seemed that the people who called themselves her parents were worried about her, which could mean they were kind, but at her mother's request, she reluctantly agreed to get engaged to that Duke Geoffrey Ithaca, the protagonist of the last novel she read. And this Duke was known by everyone as absolute trash. The heroine hadn't had time to get used to all this resettlement, let alone this engagement, so now she was very unhappy. And this bad carriage was just adding fuel to the fire. Suddenly, a companion spoke to her and said that her sighs were distracting and that it would be better if she kept quiet. And this companion was Angela, her personal maid. There was gossip in the mansion, and not very good ones about this Angela. All the other maids spoke of her as a bad person, and even more so as a maid, meaning there was something wrong with her looking out the window. The maid realized they were almost there, and Aurora decided to look for herself, and was visibly surprised by what she saw, a huge mansion that reminded her of her past life. They were greeted by one of the guards and immediately taken inside. Angela said she thought it would be cold in the south, but it wasn't that bad, and the weather was similar to the one here, but the heroine was surprised by something else. It turned out the owner's bride had arrived, but he didn't even come out to greet her, and that meant nothing good for her, as if he was already looking down on her suddenly. A girl ran past them, crying immediately, followed by a maid, but the girl said that she had not come here of her own free will, and therefore had no intention of staying. Their escort didn't even pay attention to the girl, so the heroine decided to ask who she was, and was told that she was a bride candidate. Just like Aurora herself, this information was shocking to her because she didn't know who she had come with. But her escort assured her that she had come for an interview and that she was only candidate number 42, sitting in the waiting room. The heroine despaired because she couldn't understand what kind of madman would conduct an interview to find a bride, and the most depressing thing was that they hadn't even told her anything about it. But the maid took it more calmly and simply noticed that her lady seemed truly surprised, and that therefore she should at least start preparing for the interview. Aurora couldn't believe that her maid was suggesting such a thing, but she seemed serious and saw in this marriage a great opportunity to raise her status. After that, Angela approached the heroine and told her they were on the same side and therefore had nothing to worry about. At that moment, the lady pointed out that this was very rude, but the maid immediately justified herself, saying she meant it in a positive way. In the end, the heroine concluded that she should at least give it a try because she didn't want to disappoint her mother, and Angela fully supported this idea. Her mother had done her best to invest money in this engagement, and maybe she didn't know that it was only an interview. She already had some experience with interviews from her past life, but nothing like this. This affair wasn't rated 18+, so that gave her hope that everything would be fine. Now the time had come. The assistant came out of the room and called her by name, thanking her for waiting and introducing himself as Wendell Hamilton, so now she had to follow him. The assistant reached the designated room and invited her in, where he introduced the heroine. The man asked if she was the daughter of Baron Audrey, and upon receiving confirmation, he introduced himself as Geoffrey Ithaca, and was glad to see her at Ithaca Castle. Sitting down in front of her, the Duke himself claimed that he had read her letter, and this fact surprised her. But the man explained that it was a letter her parents had sent recently, and the heroine herself did not seem to be aware of it, but she pretended to know and wanted to send it herself. The man stated that he had intended to reject her immediately after reading it, but after hearing her complaining, he somehow changed his mind when she asked if he had heard everything. The owner said that the castle was near the border, and that he often had enemies, so he had taken every possible precaution, and he had recording devices all over the castle. The woman asked suspiciously if that was what made him change his mind, but she had already started having bad thoughts, and in them he was a pervert. And that's why he could be considered vile, but suddenly he said yes. And that scared her a little, but the Duke assured her he was looking for a bride with character, like her. And this statement changed her attitude toward him now. He didn't seem like a pervert, just a fool. A frightened Wendell began to correct his master, explaining that she might have misunderstood him, and that in reality, he wasn't looking for a conventional bride, but simply an intelligent and brave one. Suddenly the Duke became serious, and now he was going to ask her to do something specifically to hit him right now. And this request left her dumbfounded. Aurora instantly put down her tea and said she hadn't signed up for this, and that it would be best if she left now. But the assistant immediately blocked the exit and asked her to wait so he could explain everything. The assistant claimed that his master had been misunderstood, and that he wanted to know if she could do it. But she was more interested in knowing why he would ask a bride about that. Suddenly, the aristocrat appeared behind her, and this made the woman step back. But Jeffrey confirmed that her gaze didn't scare him. And she herself was not afraid the aristocrat decided to apologize if his question had offended her. But now he would like the opportunity to clarify the situation, and she gave him permission to do so. The bride he wanted was not like most ideal ones, and as it was known, his pedigree was quite unique, in which case Aurora noticed he wanted someone who wasn't afraid of others' opinions. But what he really needed was someone who wasn't afraid of his gaze, since it was well known that he didn't have the best temperament and could be a bit cold with people. The nobility saw him as a bomb that would one day harm them. And even the emperor failed to subdue him. Everyone was hounding the duke, demanding that he get engaged as soon as possible. But unfortunately for them, he had a different mindset. However, he was not going to tolerate any more abuse. So he devised a plan and wanted to propose a contract to her now. And in fact, there would be no marriage, and he planned to free her in 2 years. This meant she had passed the interview, and if Aurora accepted the contract, she would have to play the role of his beloved fiancé for the next 2 years, and he would play the role of the trash that had gone mad with love. This declaration caused a commotion and a bit of sympathy, but the Duke just asked that she not say she was surprised. But the question remained as to why he wanted to be hit, and the answer was not as unpleasant as the heroine had imagined from the start. It was done to gauge her reaction and courage. Most people couldn't even look him in the eyes. Sometimes the aristocrat couldn't even say a word, as some would flee in tears at his question, and others would flee without even introducing themselves. And that meant they were not fit for the role. But Aurora showed no such reaction. Even now, she looked him straight in the eye. In fact, not everything was as bad as she imagined, and therefore it was time to find out about the reward. So the woman asked what kind of compensation she would receive. And the aide immediately perked up as if he had been waiting for this question the whole time. Wendell began to show a document concerning the remuneration, and on it, the inheritance of the mine was listed. The transfer of property rights and commercial real estate. The aide explained in more detail that the Belvedere mines produced beautiful colored diamonds, and the estate was a huge building in the capital. The commercial property was also located in a very profitable area, and all of it could be hers if she accepted the terms of the contract. To put it mildly, the heroine was interested in all of it, and without hesitating and without reading the contract, she asked where she could sign, but the aristocrat decided to tell her one thing before she signed the contract, namely, that if she had the slightest hope of love blossoming, she should refuse immediately. This statement sounded quite ridiculous. He assured her that nothing would happen with him and that she shouldn't even try. But in response, a defiant Aurora directed the question at him, as if he would be the one to fall in love with her. They stared at each other for a moment, which made the heroine think she had overplayed her hand. But the man said with a slight smile that it wouldn't happen. In this case, excitement stirred within her, and the woman offered to raise the stakes for the sake of greater interest, and her challenge was accepted. The Duke said that if he fell in love with her, he would become her faithful dog, a pet that would come at her every word, and this offer was accepted. But there was also a catch. So she asked what the benefit for him would be if she broke the contract first, and he offered to leave her without all the compensation she could get, to which the heroine agreed without a second thought, believing that anyway, she would never fall in love with him. The heroine returned to her maid completely exhausted and sat down to continue eating as if nothing had happened, noting that she should have finished earlier. After telling Angela what happened, the maid grew thoughtful, and after a few seconds said that she had heard it was the quiet people who caused problems and that her lady was the type who liked to make big mistakes. But Aurora, who casually dismissed this option, said the Duke wasn't her type, and therefore she wouldn't lose this contract. But the maid asked if the heroine was sure of that, even after seeing his face, and these words made her think. But now she was actually starting to regret that they had decided to raise the stakes because he might be mean. But he was 100% her type, and it wouldn't be easy to give up on him. And yet the heroine kept assuring her that she would fulfill the contract and receive her reward. But by then, she was sure she could find a richer and more handsome man, but Angela was quietly evaluating and judging her mistress. She noticed that the expression on her face was asking if she was so sure, and it turned out to be true. Meanwhile, the assistant greeted the Duke, and the difficult task of finding a bride was over. But Wendell wondered if he liked her even a little. Without hesitation, his master denied it, explaining that she was actually of no use to him, and the aide was very satisfied with this answer and was glad they had found someone perfect for the position. Frankly speaking, half of the candidates were mesmerized by his face, and the other half were essentially sold by their families. And that was the case with Aurora. She didn't seem to know anything about the letter her parents had written. But it no longer mattered because it was time to end this. Now it was time to deliver this news to the Emperor's palace. Now he would finally stop being harassed. 3 days passed, and the heroine had a lot of time to think about her actions. It all felt like she had won the lottery compared to this place. Her room at home was just a dump, and there was even hot water in the bathroom, and she could finally feel alive. All of that was great, but that Jeffrey guy hadn't shown up again since then, and it seemed like he had abandoned her. Suddenly, the woman shot up from the bed and turned to the 2 maids who were watching her, in disbelief, and she allowed them to ask questions if they had any. The suddenness of it confused the maids a little, but their new mistress promised them everything would be fine as she was bored too, so they shouldn't be embarrassed. This attitude made the maids relax a little, but the first question they asked caught the heroine by surprise, as they wondered if it was true that his lordship had fallen in love at first sight. The maid seemed to be furious, and began to say that he had organized this whole selection just to see her and had rejected everyone else. He couldn't sleep and was waiting for the day he could meet her again, and when the man finally found her, they promised each other eternal love. The maids heard that the Duke had been very gentle with her, and everyone in the castle and across the country was talking about it. The woman left the room, and Alfonso, who was the castle's butler, appeared before her, and after exchanging greetings, the heroine, with contained fury, asked him to tell the Duke she was here. He did so, knocking on the master's door, and announced that his fiancée was there, but there was no reply, and this began to get on her nerves. A few seconds later, the door flew open, and in came the Duke hastily dressed, who asked her what she wanted, and then suggested they talk in the garden. Once outside, Aurora addressed him as your lordship, but the man said that before she said anything, they should change how they address one another. As his fiancée, the woman shouldn't address him so formally, and a better option would be to simply call him by his first name, and he would do the same. This option suited them both. Now calling him Jeffrey, she asked if he had heard the rumors that were going around, to which he replied they were rumors about their love affair, and that he had started them. His fiancée was somewhat outraged by this, but he didn't understand why since he wasn't obligated to report everything he did. She should have figured that it was like a play in which he was the writer and director and played the leading role. Aurora asked if she was playing a supporting character, but the man easily denied it, explaining that she was just an extra. Besides, he had already said they would have to play the part of lovers, which meant there would be awkward situations, with unavoidable physical contact, and they had already agreed to those conditions. And after explaining all this to her, the Duke asked her why he had to report every little thing to her. The heroine summarized the information she had been given. It seemed what he really needed was a submissive doll to become his bride, but there was one problem he hadn't taken into account, and that was that a lady with her character couldn't allow it. This reaction interested the master, and he realized she was nothing like the letter. And the fact that he mentioned it confused her because she had no idea about the letter and what it might have said. So she decided to tell him bluntly that she hadn't read the letter her parents had sent, and that she would like to see it herself, and the Duke didn't mind. The letter said that they were very grateful that he had accepted their daughter because she was very beautiful, and would undoubtedly be obedient to her husband even at night. She was disgusted by such words, and asked him to forget he had read it because she was not like that. Then addressing the aristocrat, she told him she expected to be treated with a bit of courtesy, and that if anything happened that concerned her, she would like for them to discuss it civilly. But Jeffrey didn't understand why he should, because she might just disagree with something. But the woman assured him that if it was within reason, she was willing to take it into account, but that if not, she would have to refuse to participate. He had no reason to mock this request, so he was willing to accept it, but only if she proved herself capable. Later, the heroine and her maid arrived at a building in the middle of nowhere, a restaurant that she needed to make profitable somehow. Once inside, apart from the surprised employees, she realized not everything was as bad as it seemed. At first glance, they were also accompanied by Yetica Luna, who was a guild member and showing the coat of arms. She said they were from Yetica, and the lady beside her was the Duke's fiancée. Immediately, a commotion broke out in the building, and a few seconds later, the owner of the place, whose name was Ozar, appeared, who was also the manager of RGHC. The woman led them to the best seats, but they did not impress the heroine. So they started talking business in this restaurant called The Taste of Man. They offered 76 different human dishes. So they were given a menu, but it was so huge it looked like an entire book. There were over 1,000 different dishes. So they picked the first two and waited for them to arrive in the first place. The heroine warned that they needed to shorten the menu, to which Luna assured that a wide variety is an advantage of this restaurant. But Aurora had a different opinion, namely, that it's not necessary to prioritize the quantity of dishes over their quality. Suddenly, some workers appeared next to them addressing Oscar, stating angrily that they had been given strange plants again, which meant they should change suppliers. And out of the corner of her eye, she saw green onions. Soon their food was served, and the woman began to evaluate the food. It looked good, and was even cooked quite quickly. So it was worth a try. Now they each took a spoonful and immediately almost threw it up. And Luna and Angela concluded that it was not edible. Suddenly, 3 people rushed in and demanded food. They turned out to be orcs. And this surprised the heroine, but Luna explained that they were their most frequent guests. These diners were seated all over the restaurant and began to demand food immediately, which made the waiters run around quite a bit. Still, the question remained as to why they were in the red. If there were plenty of customers, so Oscar was asked to show the account book. And looking at it, the heroine fell into a stupor. Nothing added up, and the numbers were a complete disaster. Aurora demanded an explanation from the woman, but she just apologized, saying that they were all very inexperienced in that area, and that's why it was very difficult for them to deal with everything. The heroine realized right away that she had been lied to. It was clear that the owner was quite intelligent, and it was impossible that she wouldn't have been able to handle such a task. But judging by the fact that Luna was also silent now, she was also involved in this, and this in turn meant that she needed to see everything with her own eyes. So the order was given to take her to the kitchen. Oscar immediately began to argue that the kitchen was very dirty and unsafe, so a lady like her would be better off not entering, but the heroine's decision was unshakable. When she burst in, she immediately introduced herself as the Duke's fiancée and had come to see them, so they shouldn't pay her any attention and just go about their business. The woman began to inspect the kitchen. Everything seemed quite hygienic, except that many of the food boxes were empty, but she saw that there had been a delivery today, so she asked where all the food was, even considering the influx of customers. There shouldn't be so little, so it was necessary to know where it all had gone, but the employee didn't know or didn't want to know, and therefore couldn't answer. Oscar suddenly intervened and said that was enough, and that even if she kept digging, she still wouldn't find anything. And when asked if there was anything to find, the owner assured her there was nothing. Suddenly strange. Noises were heard coming from behind the door, which immediately alarmed the workers. But when asked if someone was there, the man began to vaguely deny it. But the harder he tried to hide it, the worse he did. When Aurora opened the door behind which she heard strange noises, she saw many people, poorly dressed and carrying large bowls. At that moment, everything became clear. The reason they were losing money was because they were feeding the poor, and the landlady confirmed it. This made her very angry, because she was sure the Duke knew, but decided to send her here anyway, and somehow wanted to fix things. Still, he wasn't going to listen to her from the beginning, although in reality she was surprised that the man was doing something so good, but still something had to be done. Oscar apologized for not saying anything, but still, he wanted to ask the heroine to pretend she hadn't seen anything, because if they didn't help them, those people would simply die. The woman also asked Luna if she was aware of what was happening here, and it turned out she knew everything before they had discovered this place. The orcs had been attacking people and stealing their food, so they had no choice but to help these people in such desperate times. But Aurora wondered why they had to do it in secret, why they had to use the restaurant as a front for charity. It turned out that the Emperor did not approve of charitable projects, and that the people above always turned a blind eye to their suffering. At which point Luna realized with horror that she had said too much. Immediately after realizing the problem, Luna began to convince them that she was sure they didn't want to do it, but it was already too late. And yet the heroine had no intention of punishing them in any way, because it was the truth. And now that everything was clear, she had to solve the problem because those people were starving in the street. Since she had arrived, she went out to meet them and asked them directly if they had come to eat. And when they said yes, she herself began to give them food. After a moment, she went back inside and said that it didn't matter who she was, but that she was not one to turn away hungry people, and that it was time to get to work. But they also had to remember that she had come with a specific purpose, and the only thing she could ask of them was to cooperate with her, and her purpose was to make a profit. To clarify the situation, the woman reiterated that she had no intention of ending this charity work, so there was nothing to worry about. She also addressed the boy who worked there, and pointed to the vegetables he had brought earlier, which he had also complained about, but the waiter had considered them unnecessary, since he didn't know what they were for. But she told him that he could mix them with some ingredients and fry them until they were crispy, and that way he would make seafood and scallion pancakes. They started cooking, and the smell caught the attention of the regular customers, who demanded to be served them, and the waiter assured them it would be a new item on the menu. Now, a test batch was taken to the orcs for them to try the dish, and in the end they were delighted with it and wanted more. The Duke, meanwhile in his room, ordered his assistant to call the tailor. Wendell figured that the gentleman wanted a new suit made, but it turned out it wasn't for him because his fiancée needed a completely new wardrobe when he saw her for the first time. He immediately realized that she had brought almost nothing with her, so he had to do something about it. The assistant offered to do it tomorrow, but the Duke insisted on doing it today, but it wasn't possible because Lady Aurora couldn't come for the fitting, which was a surprise to the aristocrat. Wendell reminded him that she was not at the castle because he had sent the woman to the restaurant, but that had been a few days ago, and the Duke didn't expect her to still be there, so he assumed she had gotten hurt and couldn't come back. But the assistant said that she was actually doing very well there. The heroine went every day to that vacant lot, and things were going quite well. She herself, preparing a new batch, was glad that the orcs liked it, and yet she was sure there were other ingredients they didn't know were edible. So next time she would have to bring everything. Aurora also realized that it was possible to tell the supplier that they would even take the products he didn't know who to sell to, and then he would most likely give them at a discount, or maybe even for free. As for the green onions, Oscar explained that they grew wild not far from here, and that maybe they could pick some from there because nobody used the land, and the Duke was the owner. The heroine was interested in the idea, so she ordered them to go collect them, and that way they could turn the land into a real field. The waiters were running from the kitchen to the dining room and back. Like crazy, there were more and more orders and they needed new workers, and then Aurora decided to go out herself. She went out into the hall. The woman went to the table to take the order, but the strange orc remarked that he wouldn't mind getting a human lady with contained anger and demonstrative politeness. The heroine assured him that there was no human lady on their menu, and therefore asked him to choose something else at that moment unexpectedly for everyone. The Duke himself entered the room and wanted to know what was happening. The waiter immediately began to explain that it was all thanks to their new manager, Miss Aurora, whose new dish invented by herself had become a new hit. That was enough. Now he was interested in knowing why his fiancée was now in such a stupid outfit, was taking orders from an orc, and the employee's life depended on this question. The waiter was scared, and started to explain that they were short-staffed, so the lady offered to help. But the aristocrat was especially angry, because she had been left alone to deal with the orc who was already making plans for her, even though she had constantly rejected him, and had asked him to stop. She turned around and said she was already engaged to the man standing right there. Observing the situation sitting down for a cup of tea, the heroine began to explain that they were still in a period of change, and that therefore they were not out of the red yet, but judging by how things were going, they would soon be in the black. But to avoid boring the picky orcs with the dishes, they intended to release something new every month, and still they received good reviews for the pancake spaghetti soup and boiled pork. But Jeffrey had a different opinion and expressed it by saying that as his fiancée she should not have gone so far. She should not take it so seriously. This statement infuriated Aurora because she had been working hard to make a profit, just as they had asked. But now she was being told there was a problem with it. And if there was, he had better say so. As the fiancé insisted, the aristocrat admitted that these results surprised him, and made him wonder if he had chosen a fiancé or an employee. It seemed like a strange compliment, and it was partly true. But it was not what the Duke wanted her to do, and in fact he wanted Aurora to be less proactive. This statement angered the heroine, but she did not show it, and simply asked if she had been put to the test, and if that gave her the opportunity to speak her mind, and the aristocrat confirmed it. But in his opinion it was nothing more than luck, and if that was all they had done, it was time for them to return to the castle. The woman asked if he wanted them to go together, and he confirmed it, adding that they were engaged after all, and the fact that he had the last word irritated the fiancé. Her former employees smiling cheerfully assured her that she had done a good job today, and this reaction confused Aurora, because it meant more rumors would start. The heroine assured them she would be back tomorrow. But her fiancé had a different opinion, and immediately refused, saying that this was enough to test her skills. The woman was reluctant to leave the place just like that, as there were still pending matters, but Luna intervened, explaining that they would send her reports, so it was not necessary to visit them often. Oscar was also of the same opinion. It was enough for them if she visited from time to time, and they should not worry about them. With the guidance they had received today, the restaurant would surely do well. Going outside, the heroine began to look around for the carriage. She had arrived in, but it turned out her fiancé had sent it back with a maid, and this raised the question of why Angela had not been seen in a long time. On the way back, Aurora commented that she was very surprised by what she had seen there, because she had never thought her fiancé was involved in charity work, and he was very popular among the workers, and it turned out to be a compliment. The woman was truly impressed by the way the Duke cared for people. The aristocrat assured her he was not doing it out of the goodness of his heart, because if racial animosity started to grow, a new war could break out, and this was how he managed that threat, which was why he did not really care that the restaurant was in the red. With these words, he had completely destroyed the good impression she had received not long ago, so now the question was why he had decided to come today. Jeffrey said it was just curiosity. He was sure that Aurora would be unable to do anything and would give up. But she did not do that. At that moment, the heroine was overwhelmed with anger and asked if she could hit him once, to which the man reminded her that the offer for a match was still open, so she could try. His slight smile left the heroine very confused, and she had to take back her words, dismissing it as a rhetorical question. The Duke also remembered that he wanted to inform her that he would be away from the castle for some time, and until he returned, she was not to even think of leaving his domain. And when he returned, they could talk. Aurora said it sounded like she was being held captive, but he was fine with calling it that. However, the fiancé asked if this was related to the growing racial tensions, and at this question Jeffrey frowned, and after a few seconds, he explained that it was about the guild, so he would leave the question for later, and had no intention of lingering. 3 weeks passed, and Angela, bringing another report, explained that the orcs were going crazy for the new filled pancakes they had been lining up since the morning, and all they wanted were pancakes. This could mean the creatures had a sweet tooth, so it was worth putting more desserts on the menu. She already had several options in mind. While the heroine was thinking about new dishes, Angela mentioned she had heard something on the way that the Duke had been back for a while, and this news greatly interested Aurora. Now, with obvious anger, she headed to his study. The woman had been cooped up all this time because of him, and the man had not even thought to tell her anything when he returned. In front of his office was a cheerful Wendell, who told her he was on his way to see her, but she just walked past him, saying she was going to see his boss. Right then, she began to pound on his door, demanding to see him. But Wendell, who immediately blocked her path, fearfully assured her that she did not need to do that. He was clearly beside himself, and heard the conversation between the assistant and the fiancé, and she demanded to know why they would not let her in. Suddenly, he threw the door open. He reminded her that he had asked not to be disturbed, and she immediately realized something was wrong. Specifically, his eyes. In just an instant, they returned to their natural color, but she still managed to see it, and this sudden change confused her. Nonetheless, the woman stated she had come to discuss something and hoped the man had not forgotten what he had said, that he would listen to her as soon as he returned. Once inside the room, the heroine asked him if he was feeling unwell, but the Duke bravely claimed that she should not worry, and although Aurora had chosen a bad day to meet with him, he would keep his promise. The glasses really suited him, and this was a problem at that moment. On command, Wendell handed the heroine a form containing her schedule for the future. Starting next week, she would receive lessons in culture and etiquette to prepare for life in high society. But there was one point that concerned her. and it was that the engagement party would take place quite soon in just 1 month, but she was assured that would be enough. The heroine assumed it would be a small gathering, but the Duke immediately shattered her illusion, saying it would be very extravagant. So he was interested in her opinion. The woman calmly said that everything seemed fine, but it was not the reaction he expected. Jeffrey had heard that most ladies dreamed of a lavish engagement, but it seemed she was not one of them. Aurora, sighing heavily, explained that this is what happens when you get married for the sake of it. She did not care. But in her opinion, the more extravagant the better. And if he cannot act like he loves her, then people will need something to distract them. She also took note that this party would mark her debut in high society, and her fiancé confirmed it. But since the rumors about them were spreading quite quickly, she needed to remember to memorize the next page of the form. But there she saw a title that sounded like The Duke's Passionate Love Project, and this bewildered her greatly. But the assistant thought it was worth explaining. During a business trip to the east, the Duke of Ithaca fell in love with a woman, but when he returned home, he never learned her name. The man could not get the beautiful image out of his head, so he decided to arrange an interview, hoping that she might find him, and then he had a fateful reunion with the woman of his dreams, with whom he plans to live the rest of his life. Wendell was delighted with this plan and believed that everyone would believe it, and some would even add their own details to the story. But now the question arose as to whether the Duke himself was confident in himself and his ability to behave as if he were in love. But he only assured them with a wise expression that if money could buy happiness, then love could be bought. But still she could not understand how a man like him could fall in love. It all sounded like a popular trope, but the genre was so important, and it was not up to the reader to decide. The Duke also realized that he was aware the heroine was still working at the restaurant. The reports were good, but the man wanted to ask her not to go there anymore because it was not safe. The situation at the border was unstable, and although everything had been going well lately, the restaurant was too close to the border. Jeffrey did not want it to be seen as a careless fiancé, and Aurora should understand that, but she could have gone somewhere else, as long as she took a bodyguard with her. They reached an agreement, and then the man asked them to leave the room. As he was very tired, the heroine was not enthusiastic about the lessons that awaited her. She was not even sure she could cope with a schedule so tight, and she really did not want to be punished. Angela became very interested in this word, and Aurora explained that before coming here she had classes, and that if she ever made a noise with the cup, she would be pinched. It happened every time she made a mistake, but she had a strict teacher, and that was probably how everyone learned, but the maid assured her it was not like that. Angela asked the lady if she had really lost her memory, and upon receiving confirmation, she asked if it could be because of her family. This was very strange, because if a minor was sick, she was immediately sent to the hospice. But the lady was not in her right mind and was sold to some duke. It was suspicious, and Angela had heard of mistreatment. But in any case, it was the first time the maid had heard of children being punished during classes. The girl told herself that if she had been there, the heroine wondered what would have happened then, and Angela, with a frightened expression, left the question to her imagination. At that moment, Wendell knocked on the door and said that her teacher, the Countess Rossman, had arrived at the castle, and he thought it would be good for them to meet beforehand, and that is why he came. The woman was already waiting for her in one of the rooms, and as soon as she entered and introduced herself, she immediately noticed an angry look on her face. When she returned to her room, she thought that she would soon die at this rate. The heroine could not imagine that her entire day would be spent in lessons. In the morning, there was a 3-hour dance class at midday. There was a 3-hour culture class, and in the afternoon, there was a 3-hour history class. It seemed to have no end, and now the woman realized that she needed a snack to recover a little. But just at that moment, Angela, who was always chewing on something, arrived and offered her a candy. The maid asked if those teachers had also punished her, but the heroine described them as very nice, and very impressed by how quickly she had adapted. This was not really surprising because in her past life, she had studied as if her life depended on it, and that is why they asked her to increase the pace. Angela realized that just like with her work at the restaurant, the lady was sometimes surprisingly good at what she did, which was a careless compliment. But Angela did not know any better. Now it was time to go to history class, which the heroine did not want to go to at all. Everything seemed normal, but she felt that something was wrong with her. At first, the Countess seemed very nice. She exuded nobility. She was calm and elegant. But that did not last long, and her first question was if it was dye because her hair color did not look natural. Afterwards, she asked her some rather personal questions, like who she got her hair color from, and for what reason she had not been taught until now. She has been criticizing every little thing for 2 days, her way of speaking, the slight slouch she has during classes, and so on. Aurora would have loved to leave it all behind. But Wendell was fascinated with her, and it turned out that she was not an easy woman to recruit, so they had to put up with her. Now sitting in her office, the heroine wondered what she was going to be scolded for this time. But her question was answered immediately, as the Countess said from the doorway that she was not even going to be greeted, and she felt more and more frustrated. Aurora stood up immediately and began to apologize, as she did not know the teacher had arrived. But she calmed her down and told her to sit down, and this gave the heroine hope that the Countess was in a good mood today. If only she had known what would happen a moment later. Angela suddenly entered the room with a tray for the tea ceremony, and the Countess explained that today they would learn social etiquette, and that the setting would be her first tea party. The maid set down the tray and waited, which led the teacher to demand to know why she was still there, but she assured her that his lordship had asked her to stay. In case they did not like what was prepared, Aurora felt deceived. She did not believe the Duke had really asked her to, and so the question of her staying here remained open. It was time to start the lesson, and first they had to practice facing unpleasant questions. As could be seen, the Duke was not indifferent to her, and yet he had done everything possible to bring her here, despite her low status. But still, the Countess commented that one had to be more careful, because the more intensely love burns, the sooner it fades. The heroine understood the hint and still asked if they had just implied that her engagement could be broken, but the Countess, with a faint smile, told her not to get so angry over a simple question, as it was nothing compared to what she would face in the future. And yet this direct questioning revealed that she had never interacted in such a society. Aurora admitted that she had lost her memory as a result of an accident, and that her amnesia had caused her to miss out on many experiences. Upon hearing this, the Countess burst out laughing, and then commented that it was a very convenient excuse to avoid taking any responsibility for her failures. But the old woman also asked if the Duke was aware of it, to which the heroine responded negatively, because they had not talked about it, and she did not want to worry him for no reason. But the teacher simply looked gloatingly at her student, and with a false smile told her that it was not good to keep secrets from your lover like that, and that you could not do that to your fiancé. Wendell, meanwhile, was finishing his report to the Duke, after which the Duke indicated that he hoped there would at least be news of his fiancée, and therefore he would ask how her classes were going. This question surprised the assistant, who did not expect the gentleman to be interested in something like that, but he explained that her teachers called her a genius and were very impressed with her. He also added that everyone was happy except for one Lady Rosamond, who was in charge of culture. She could not say a single good word about her, which meant he had to find out for himself what the problem was. At that very moment, as if on cue, he was informed that the Countess had asked to see him, and she was allowed to enter. After exchanging greetings, the old woman, with an embarrassed expression, thanked him for receiving her like this. The Countess, with demonstrative sympathy, commented that it was painful for her to talk about it, but that she had come to tell him the truth about Miss Aurora. This interested him, but the Duke assured her that he could hardly be surprised, and that it would be better to get on with it. It was very difficult for the teacher to control her trembling, but this was her chance to make him feel indebted to her, and therefore it was necessary to sound truthful, so that there would be no doubt about her words. Shortly before that conversation, the Countess had received a document, in which it was said that the Duke's fiancée was the daughter of Baron Audrey, the woman about whom gossip and secrets circulated. From the beginning, she was happy to take this position, but no one could imagine that it would be the daughter of that damned Camilla. The Countess knew she was desperate, but she still could not believe she had sent her daughter to her Duke. But it was not clear what the aristocrat liked about her. He had to see it for himself. That is why the old woman agreed, but as soon as she saw her pupil, she could not believe that Audrey could have a daughter like her. And so, immediately out of personal animosity, the Countess said that the Baron's daughter was actually a commoner. Just anyone, because in her family there was only one daughter, who was Julia. They had dared to mock the great Duke, and the teacher thought that it should not be hidden from him, and so she was here. But something happened that the Countess did not expect, and the aristocrat commented that it was for the best, and that her origin should not be forgotten. The man had risen through the ranks of battle to become a duke, but he himself had once been a commoner, and this seemed to cause a great stir in her circle. However, if the woman had already forgotten it, it meant that it was not that important to her. The Countess was frightened, and continued to insist that they had tried to deceive him.